Welcome to My Agile Story. My Agile Story is an agile planning app that represents a typical Scrum board in a software development group. It's online and it's virtual. It has a lot of the same things that a Scrum board with post-it notes would have. It's very simple. It's not overly complicated. You basically make user stories. You put them in to-do lists. You put them in doing lists, which I call sprints. You can move them to the verify section, and then once they're verified, they can be moved to the done section. So let's get started. First, we're going to add a new user, which if you want to try this, you should. And just use any information you want. Don't need to use anything that's personal identifying for your experimenting with it. Just create a user of any type or any name. I'm just going to use new user at example.com and just a simple password. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this so that I don't have to type it in. You can add your name, a little bit about yourself, etc. if you want. Okay, so now that you've done that, you press the login button and you enter your user information in. So I'll have to do that. Okay, now we're in. So basically here is the Scrum board. We have the to-do list, the sprint, the testing, and the done. And so to create something in My Agile Story, first you have to create a project. So you press the new project icon, and we're going to create a project, and we're going to call this Time Machine. Just as an example of a project, this is not necessarily a software project. You could call this a hardware project because we're going to make a time machine. We select the project under the project menu here, and there's nothing on the board yet because we got to create user stories first. So you press the user story, and we're going to add some user stories. So in this case, I want my time machine to have a speedometer, and as a time traveler, I want to know the speed so that I know how long it will take to reach my destination. Okay. At this point, in usual Agile thing, you want to have some test criteria. We're not going to enter that in here, but this is where you can enter your test criteria, and if you have a conversation with your group about this particular story, you can add things here. Down below here now is the phase that it's going to go in. It defaults to do, and then the priority. We're not going to do anything with the priority just yet. We'll just add the user story. Okay, now you can see that we have the user story speedometer on the screen. So we just add another user story. Let's just have fun with this. We'll have breaks as a time traveler. I want to stop in case I change my mind. All right, and we'll add that user story. We'll add another one. Doors that lock. So time traveler, I want doors that lock so they don't fall out. Okay, so we have 3 user stories here. Now this little slider here represents the priority. They're all priority 1. So if we wanted to have the speedometer be later in the project, now it's sorted the list so that it's later in the project. So you can change the priority in different ways. You can change the priority here. The priority goes from 1 to 10. I can put my speedometer back there, and now that's a priority. So typically what you would do is you would sort through your stories, figure out which ones you want to do in your sprints, and then they'd be at the top of the list. But at any point, you can just press the sprint button and those user stories go to the sprint. So now all that we have left in our to-do list is doors that lock. If we press our sprint button on the Scrum board, you can see we have speedometer and brakes. And so at this point, we can work on these projects. And as a developer, we might enter in our conversation some things to tell the tester or something like that. We might indicate what our percentage complete is. So let's say we did 50% of it, and then our boss knows that we've done 50% of that user story. This one hasn't been worked on yet. So let's say we're done with this. At this point, we could say 100%, and we could just leave it here in the sprint board, or we could just move it to testing by pressing the testing button. So now this will be in testing. Now, this can be used however you want the percent complete, because the tester obviously wouldn't have this be 100% as soon as they get it. So you could just change that before you move it over to the board, or you could do it right before you press the sprint button. It's really up to you what you want to do. But now I change it to 0. So if we look at the sprint, we have nothing going on in brakes, we have nothing going on in speedometer. Let's say we're done with the speedometer, testing it, we can just click this button to the to done list. And so then it's in the to done list. So this is a very simple application. You can have a lot of fun with it. I've been actually using it to plan my Agile story itself. I can show you that next. So now let me show you an actual project where I've actually used my Agile story. The funny thing about this is I'm actually using my Agile story itself to plan the project, my Agile story. I couldn't do that initially when I was just getting everything kind of templated up, but as soon as I was able to put user stories into the web app, I started using it. And so here's my current backlog of items that I want to work on. Technically I have a Scrum board with these buttons, but I wanted to have a Scrum board to show the entire project. More likely the user stories will be smaller cards, just maybe probably the titles, and then they'll have 4 sections. What's neat about that potentially is you could actually have this on the wall on a big monitor, a touchscreen monitor or something like that, and you could actually show management what the team's working on. My vision of this was basically a virtual Scrum board, and so that's what this is. Anyway, so you can see what I've worked on so far. These items here, they're all finished. Moving stories between backlog, sprint, verify, and done. That was a new feature recently added. You can see the priorities are kind of all over the map here. These changed over time. So they don't really matter with the priority at this point. I used to have a button here to actually put the user story back in the backlog if somehow that particular feature was not implemented as the customer cared for. I thought that was a little dangerous to have the button so easily accessible. So you can always change everything under the dialog for editing the user story, the phase that it's in and such like that. So let's do that for the edit project info. We're going to just put it back to do. Okay, so if we go back to the to-do list, you can see here's edit project info. So I'm just using this as an example to kind of show some of the other buttons in the program. So here we have edit project info, and just the project has some simple things, just the name and a description. So that's what Agile Story is. You can delete the project. If you press delete, it will warn you, and you just don't want to. I might add like a double delete confirmation because this is irreversible. You don't want that. You can also just press delete on the actual user story itself. Same kind of message comes up. So these are most of the features. You have a user button here to edit your user information. I wanted to keep this very simple because, a Scrum board with post-it notes in itself is a very simple thing too. And this program's supposed to kind of mimic that same simple approach to agile planning. Eventually, I'm going to add some of these other features where you could copy projects. Yeah, that's not really good for the dry principle. Do not repeat yourself. But so maybe this is a low priority. Let's put that down there, and it's like low priority list. Maybe that's a silly requirement. So now it's like at the end of the list. Scrum board's pretty important, so let's put that up top. So you can basically and hashing passwords is important for security. I think I might hatch actually usernames too, so that the server doesn't know any knowledge of your username or your password. Things like that. So I have to think through some of these features, but that's the whole point of agile development, is to think through these features. We're going to move this back to done, and that's pretty much the demonstration. I encourage you to go ahead and have fun with it. Use it for your own projects. Make sure you don't put any personal information in your username just yet, because I haven't hashed things yet. So just make up stuff and make an account and have some fun with it. Thanks for looking at it.